right, today we are going to cover titles so that we are ready to refer to a number of different kinds of text in our upcoming synthesis essay. So as the title here implies, titles do matter. They can convey a lot about your work and the kind of source you're referring to. So here we go. The first thing we need to review is when to use italics versus quotation marks. So here's the simple rule. Shorter works take quotation marks. Shorter works might include articles, essays, poems, short stories, songs, etc. So for example, mysterious kidney disease plagues Central America would be an article from a newspaper perhaps. Shake It Off would be a song title. Longer works, on the other hand, get italicized when you format them. So books, plays, films, such as Persepolis. This is a graphic novel with a longer text. Guys and Dolls, a play. Both of those are examples of longer text and they get italicized. So here's the trick. Sometimes students wonder, how exactly do I determine if something's long or short? What's the cutoff? How many pages? How many words? There's a kind of simple trick to help you remember. If it's something that could only be published as a larger work and could not be picked up off the shelf as its own entity, put it in quotation marks. If it's something that could be published on its own and therefore be picked up off the shelf as its own entity, then italicized it. So think about walking into Barnes & Noble. I'm looking at all the shelves in Barnes & Noble. I couldn't walk up to a shelf and pick up a song title. That wouldn't be published on its own, but the album would be published. I could go pick up the album, the CD, off the shelf, and therefore the album title is in italics, but the song itself is in quotation marks. So that's kind of the trick. Think of yourself walking into Barnes & Noble. Could I pick this thing up off the shelf? If so, it's a longer work and it's italicized. If I couldn't, if it's part of a larger work, if it's not published on its own, then it's in quotation marks. There's a couple odd tricks that we also want to review. So journals and magazines are in italics. So that's the journal or the magazine title itself, like Time Magazine, U.S. News and World Report, Vernon Hills Review. Kind of the same rule applies. You could walk up and pick up the whole Time Magazine off the shelf. Long musical pieces are kind of a weird exception to the rule. So if it's like a whole orchestra or a whole opera, like Puccini's Madame Butterfly, that gets italicized. Television and radio programs like Dateline, Seinfeld, Fresh Air, Car Talk, the program itself is italicized, which again makes sense. It's kind of the whole program, whereas the individual episode or the individual episode would be in quotation marks. Artworks like the Venus de Milo, Mona Lisa, those are italicized. They're pieces in and of themselves. They're not published as part of a larger work. And this is kind of a weird one because speeches technically are shorter works. They maybe would be published, in an anthology, for example. But the rule is that a famous speech like the Gettysburg Address, Washington's second inaugural address, those are italicized. I think the thinking there is they kind of stand on their own. They're their own text and they're famous, so they become italicized. Long poems, like epic poems. So, for example, Milton's Paradise Lost is technically written in poetry format, but it's thousands of pages. So that gets italicized. It's its own text. It would be published on its own. It's not like a short one-page poem. Pamphlets, such as new developments in AIDS research. Pamphlet is its own publication. It stands on its own and it's italicized. All right, so let's do a quick review of quotation marks versus italicized text. So if you want to just take a quick moment, pause the screencast and write in Q for any text that should be formatted with quotation marks and I for any text that should be italicized. Go ahead and play when you're ready. All right, let's review. So SpongeBob SquarePants is a TV series. It should be italicized. Tiny Desk Concert is an album. Again, italicized. You could walk into Barnes & Noble and pick that album up off the shelf. But Same Love, the individual song, you could not pick it up off the shelf. It's not published on its own, so it's in quotation marks. Into the Woods, the play, would be italicized. It's its own work. And The Time of the Butterflies is a long book, obviously, so that's italicized. The Odyssey is an epic poem. That's italicized. Again, it's hundreds of pages. It's not a small poem. A New Battle for Equal Education is an editorial, so that would be in quotation marks. An editorial is kind of like an article. It's someone's opinion. It's a short text that would be published maybe like in the New York Times, for example. Among Strangers is a short story that wouldn't be published on its own. It would be part of a larger anthology. Hopefully you did okay on quotation marks versus italics. So the next question is whether to capitalize or not to capitalize. So you'll notice when you see titles formatted that not all of the words are capitalized, and there's some tricks to learn about when to capitalize and when to not. We find that a lot of students just come thinking that you capitalize all long words and you put all short words in lowercase, and in fact, that's not exactly the rule. Let's go over what the rules are. No matter what, you always capitalize the first and last word. But when the words are not the first or last, there's a couple rules that need to apply. So any articles are the, a, and an. Articles are always lowercase. Don't capitalize any prepositions: to, from, in, away, down, up. I find this one to be the harder rule for students to learn just because they don't totally know all the prepositions. But remember our the street trick. If you take the word and put it in front of the street and it makes sense, it's probably a preposition like to the street, from the street, in the street, away from the street, down the street, up the street. So if you're not totally sure if a word is a preposition, put it in front of the street, and if it makes a logical prepositional phrase, you probably have a preposition on your hands. Conjunctions like and, but, those are not capitalized. To as an infinitive, like to fly, does not get capitalized. But everything else should be capitalized, and that includes small verbs and pronouns, even though students tend to want to make those lowercase. So even verbs like be or pronouns like I, or you, those are still capitalized, even though they're small words. So the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime, the as an article gets capitalized, even though it's an article because it's the first word, but of is lowercase because it's a preposition. The is lowercase because it's an article. In is lowercase because it's a preposition, and the is lowercase again because it's an article. The Wizard of Oz, everything is capitalized except for of because it's a preposition. I sit and so is a poem, and everything is capitalized except for and because it's a conjunction. Harry Potter and is lowercase because it's a conjunction. The is lowercase because it's an article. Wrecking Ball has no words that would be lowercased. So let's give it a try. If you take a list of 10 titles here, you want to make two choices. One is whether it needs to be in quotation marks or italicized, and two, which word should be capitalized versus lowercase. So go ahead and pause the screencast, write your answers in on your handout, and then we'll see how you did. All right, let's check in. So turn down for what is a song. So we know it needs to be in quotation marks because it's an individual song. It would be published as part of a larger album. And we know down is a preposition, and so is for. Down the street, for the street. So both of those are going to get lowercase. The Tragedy of Romeo and Juliet is a play, so it'd be italics. Of is a preposition, and is a conjunction, so those should be in lowercase. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Over is a preposition, and the is an article. Everything else should be capitalized. Where'd You Go, Bernadette is a book, so it'd be italicized, and everything in that title would be capitalized. There's nothing that applies to our rules. Some students might want to put you and go in lowercase because they're short words, but they don't apply to any of our rules, so those should be capitalized. The Sneaker Comes of Age is an article, so it'd be in quotation marks. Of is a preposition, so that gets lowercase. Everything else gets capitalized. Even the is a article, but it's the first word in the title, so it stays capitalized. Where the Wild Things Are is a book, so it's in italics, and everything except for the article, get capitalized. The New Yorker magazine is it's a magazine, it's a whole publication, so it's in italics, and everything in that title would be capitalized. Symphony Number 5 is a musical piece. It's in italics, and everything is capitalized there. That's kind of, remember, a weird exception. Long musical pieces are italics and quotation marks. Sigh No More is an album, so it's in italics, and nothing in that title gets lowercase. Even though no is a short word, it does not apply to any of our rules. And finally, Loving by the Book, Voice and Romance is an essay, so it would be in quotation marks. By is a preposition, the is an article, and is a conjunction. And notice that the word after the colon is capitalized. So in titles, if you were to use a colon, like Loving by the Book, colon, Voice and Romance, the word after the colon is always capitalized no matter what. So even if that was a the or an and, it would still be capitalized. So just kind of remember that. Capitalize the word right after the colon no matter what it is. It kind of like resets the title. It's like a subtitle. All right, so hopefully did pretty well with the title formatting. As long as we're on the topic of titles, let's just take a quick moment to review how to write good titles for your own essay. Couple rules to keep in mind. Rule number one, you don't underline, italicize, or quote. Just type in the same format that you do the body of your essay. The same capitalization rules apply. So all the things we just talked about when you're titling your own essay at the top of your document, you just capitalize all the rules that we just talked about. Don't make the title bigger than the rest of your essay. So sometimes students have the urge to make their title like 40-point font and it takes up half the first page. Don't do that. The essay should be exactly the same size as the rest of your text. Avoid using the word essay in your title. So that's a pretty boring essay. We know it's an essay, we're reading it. So find something more interesting. Don't mention the course name in your title. That's for your heading. So put the course name in your heading, but not in your title. Make it interesting. This is your first chance to hook your reader and make them want to read the rest of your work. So make it interesting. Make it kind of juicy and intriguing and make us want to read more. As you saw in our example, colons can be an effective way to format your title. So for example, Antony, the true orator in Julius Caesar. A colon is just kind of a nice way to introduce a concept, have kind of a quick, catchy title followed by maybe a detailed subtitle behind the colon. They actually did a study on essays that used colons in the title, and they found that essays that used colons tend to receive higher grades. So there you go, make of that what you will. Do not use the title of the book as your title. So for example, if we read Macbeth, you cannot use Macbeth as the title of your essay. Shakespeare beat you to that one. So you have to have your own original title. And do not use the title of the assignment as your title. So don't say gender synthesis paragraph. That's a terrible title. It really does not make me want to read anything beyond that. So find something original, find something engaging as your title. So just for practice, pick one of these, an essay about fast food consumption in the US, an essay on your own views about high school, or a title for a presentation about deforestation. Pick one of these and apply these rules that we just talked about to see if you can create your own intriguing, hooking title that makes me want to read more. All right, so that is it for titles. As we mentioned, your upcoming assignment is going to ask you to refer to the titles of the many sources that you're finding. So you're going to have to be very careful about formatting and capitalizing to be sure that you are effectively referring to those texts. All right, have a good one.